This episode is brought to you by Windrose Recovery, a family of premier addiction treatment programs in southeastern Wisconsin. Privately owned, Windrose Recovery offers a full continuum of personalized care for those struggling with addiction, including the Manor for residential treatment, Midwest Detox for inpatient detoxification, and Windrose Counseling for outpatient treatment. With highly personalized treatment focused on trauma, Dr. Chantelle Thomas and her expert team offer an authentic experience, creating the kind of deep emotional change that's crucial for long-term recovery. If you or someone you love is struggling with addiction, call Windrose Recovery at 414-409-5300. You can learn more about Windrose Recovery by clicking the link in the show notes or by visiting windroserecovery.com. Thank you for listening to The Path to Authenticity. My name's Tom Gentry. I think of the show as the opposite of small talk. You'll hear real conversations with real people who know who they are. We talk about what makes them who they are, how they became who they are, and how we might become truer expressions of who we are.
Live on the road, live with no tether.
I am Pam Peckham, and this is The Path to Authenticity.
Nowhere to run, nothing to hide from the government's prying eye. Take yourself a summer holiday.
The Path to Authenticity proudly supports the I Speak Media Foundation, advancing media literacy education through an evolving series of outreach programs within the communities that need it most. For more information, visit ispeakmedia.org. If this is your first time here, thanks for checking it out. If not, thanks for coming back. I'm Tom Gentry, and this is The Path to Authenticity. Episode 144 for October 5th, 2021 features a conversation with Pam Peckham, who's a therapist at the Manor, which is one of the facilities owned and operated by the show's sponsor, Windrose Recovery. And Pam's someone who I've gotten to work with and who I've enjoyed working with. And so I was excited to get her on the show. So I hope you'll take a look at the workshop I put together called Path to Purpose. I still have openings. There's a link in the show notes. Would love to have you. And I'm working on a retreat for the first of the year. I'm also working on a couple more podcasts that I haven't talked about yet. And lots of exciting stuff. The 20 questions on Clubhouse. Trying to do that every day, Monday through Friday. Right now it's not happening every day, Monday through Friday, but we're getting there. So, anyway, I hope you enjoy my conversation with Pam. She's fantastic. Here you go, Pam Peckham.
Nowhere to run, nothing to hide from the government's prying eye. Take yourself a summer
So why don't you
holiday.
tell the listener what you do?
Get some time.
I do a couple different things, but I know you personally through my job here at the Manor. I am the assistant clinical director of the Manor, which is part of Windrose Recovery. It is the residential treatment center, and I'm also a primary clinician that works with clients here at the Manor. And then on the side, I have a private practice that I do very part-time.
So Obviously, the Manor is a very much trauma-focused addiction treatment program.
Correct.
Aside from trauma, where would you say your area of specialty lies?
I would say with process addictions, one of the things that I've really tried to do when I began working with addictions was to specialize in all other process addictions. And so I have a specialty within eating disorders, and I also have a specialty in sex and love addiction. So when they first brought me on to see clients at the Manor, a lot of times they were putting me with either really complex trauma cases or with clients that had some dual patterns with either eating disorders or love and sex addiction, or gambling and things like that. So that to me is kind of how I got here. And that's pretty much a lot of the work that I do and a lot of the education that I do when I do the group therapies here, as we're talking about underlying trauma, but also how this comes out in other addictions and process addictions specifically.
What is the work that has influenced your approach with sex and love addiction?
You mean whose work?
Yeah.
I did some training with Patrick Carnes. So when I got my CSAT, I was trained under him. But I would say that the reason I got into this is I was at a lot of conferences where Rob Weiss was, and he has a very unique style, would be one way to say it, but he was also incredibly direct and open around sex and love addiction and talked about it in a way that I've never heard of it. And it really fit for me, all the things that I was seeing with a lot of my clients, whether or not they had alcohol and drug. But I loved the fact that he wasn't afraid to be controversial, and he wasn't afraid to say things that I think at the time, I mean, this was probably 15 years ago, that people were not talking about, but needed to talk about. So that I would say Rob definitely has had the most influence on me.
So, but that was a little further along in your career when you started to get that kind of training?
Yes, absolutely.
And before you trained, how did you get into addiction?
I actually fell into it. I kind of.
Yeah?
So basically, I started out when I was in graduate school. I started out getting a job at Rogers Memorial Hospital working on the Eating Disorder Center as a coach.
Okay.
And then I was hired even before I got my master's degree as a primary therapist. So lots of the women, I specifically worked with the females. We did have a male program, but lots of the women had dual diagnosis with alcohol and drug addiction. So when I started working there with eating disorders, I decided then to pursue a certification in alcohol and drug. Everything I've ever done with clients, I feel like I need to be certified in. Like I've always felt like it's really ethical to take it to the next level, to actually be an expert in what you're doing versus just think you know about it. So that was the same with love and sex addiction. Is then I started to see, as the internet became more accessible and pornography became more accessible, I started to have more sex addicts come out, and then started to look at attachment and dependency issues with my clients, and it all just kind of fit together, actually.
Are you familiar with the Philip Flores addiction as an attachment disorder?
Yes, it is. It absolutely is.
Yeah. You've really had a great career. I mean, working at a place like Rogers Memorial and cutting your teeth there, and then did you go into private practice from there, or?
Yes, I went into private practice from there. And that's in my private practice. I mean, a lot of the programs that I worked with or my clients were coming from are really symptom based, and they didn't look at the underlying issues. And so one of the reasons that I went into private practice was I began the EMDR certification around that time. And Rogers Memorial Hospital at the time did not believe in using that and really didn't believe in a trauma lens. And so I left to pursue EMDR in my private practice.
When you mentioned being symptom focused.
Yes.
The alcohol isn't really the problem. So I'm hoping maybe you can talk about that, about what that really means, because we know that alcohol isn't the problem for alcoholics. Drugs aren't the problem for drug addicts. So how do you explain that to the lay person?
Well, one thing that I can say is how I learned it to be true was when this would be back in the 90s, I would say late 90s, when I worked for Rogers. And when we were working with eating disorder clients, our focus was to minimize behaviors and minimize thought processes and obsessions that went with behaviors. And at that point, all we really did was talk to people about changing their beliefs around things and then changing their behaviors. And there wasn't this underlying concept that there was actually a payoff that they were getting from their behaviors. And so I kept finding myself actually upsetting my clients, who already are perfectionists, right? Because I'd ask them to decrease their thoughts and behaviors and they couldn't do it. So they kept failing at the task and they kept not getting better and needing more treatment. So I started to think about, like, well, what's happening here that they can't follow their meal plan. They can't just change their pattern. They can't stop checking their weights or checking their bodies to see if they've lost weight. So there was something so much bigger than that going on for me. And then I also started to see what would happen when clients would lose weight and how they became completely detached from themselves emotionally and physically. And I was able to see how the addictive behaviors allowed them to feel relief and to feel blocked and to feel numb. And that was really my first indication that these clients are uncomfortable. They're in pain. They have hurt. They feel, to want to kill yourself by starving, it's a really dire place to be. And so I started to see that there's this pattern and how they couldn't give up their numbing mechanisms. They couldn't give up their obsessions because it was easier for them to obsess about food and weight all day than it was to actually think or talk about the sexual abuse or the trauma that they've been through. So that was really kind of my first implication of that. And that's one of the reasons that I went into EMDR training. And so I guess for the lay person there is scientific truth that if you use any chemical that's addicting, you'll be addicted, right? If you use it enough of it long enough, you can physically be addicted to that. But why do we need to use it enough and long enough?
Right.
Why would somebody just want to do that or need to do that? So I just was able to then look in a different lens of trauma and how a trauma affects the psyche and the body and the spirit. And that really then led me into understanding that chemical use is all about survival. It's a resiliency to be able to get through things that we would normally not be able to get through on our own. I look at it as a gift that as resilient human beings, we can move into using whatever we need to use to stay alive. But eventually with any disease, that gift becomes the curse and it will end up killing you. I don't know if I'm saying that like
no,
maybe layman's term.
It makes sense to me.
Yeah.
And what I'm thinking about as I'm listening to you is that, that's my personal experience.
Yes.
And even when I was in the depths of my alcoholism, I knew I was drinking that way because I hurt. It wasn't because I wanted to drink that way. I hurt.
Of course.
And nobody ever goes to the depths of despair that you go to before you end up in residential treatment for an addiction because they felt like doing it one day. I mean, it just doesn't work that way.
No, it does not work that way.
What I like about what we're talking about is that it's much more humane and kind, and there's an absence of judgment because, and I think, a lot of, I'm sure you see this, families sort of, if they don't heal, need to remain invested in the idea that the person of concern was doing something wrong, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
It's easier for them to wrap their head around that.
Well, especially if the family members are the one that's causing them pain.
Right. Right.
We've seen that a lot here, where we've talked with family members that are really upset to hear that the clients are actually in a nice environment and they're getting treated well, and they really want, whether it's their spouses or their children, to actually be uncomfortable and almost be punished. Yeah. And I remember Dr. Thomas, the clinical director, said to one lady, look, if punishing would work, we would do that, but it doesn't. It just doesn't work. So that's not what we're about here.
Well, and it's funny because we talked about Crossroads Center Antigua in my experience with that facility and having been a part of it. And one of the things I used to hear from family members is, I'm not sending him to an island. I need to go to an island.
Yep.
Why do I want to send him to an island? Yeah, it was.
Yep. Or they're just on vacation and they look like they're having a great time. And
yeah.
I think what I say back is, can you imagine stepping into the doors of an unknown place with unknown people, surrendering everything that you have and living there for 30 to 90 days? Because every second here is treatment. Every second.
Yeah. I mean, it's a hard pill to swallow.
Yes.
I think for me to get over, the first hump was, I'm one of these people who needs something this drastic, right?
Correct.
And then who the hell are all these people around me, and what are these things they're trying to teach me, and is it valid, and will it work for me? And, there's all that confusion, which is, aside from the despair that you feel because you've created this situation in your life that you have to remove yourself from your family, from society in order to, it is a very drastic sort of measure for someone to take. And that's not even considering the stigma associated with all of it. Like
correct.
Being a person who needs to go to rehab.
Correct.
It is a lot.
You don't end up in our program because you're just drinking a little.
Right.
So most people that end up in this program are in some way killing themselves with their chemicals.
Mm-hmm.
So their shame is already so great, because when we are under the influence, we usually do very illogical, unsensible things.
Mm-hmm.
And so what happens is they know they need to quit, they can't quit, and then they get drunk, and then they do something really illogical and insane. And then what do they feel? They feel like they need to drink more.
Yeah, it just builds on itself. There's nowhere to go. You're stuck in the cycle.
So basically, to try to then think that making clients more uncomfortable is going to help them, it's just going to perpetuate their need to die, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
Or want to die.
Yeah.
It doesn't work.
Well, for me, these sort of harsh statements that were said to me when I was in treatment that got me to do this, to comply and to do the work and all that, they only worked because that I was trained for that sort of stuff to work.
Yes.
And I'm still friends with the woman who was my therapist all those years ago. And sometimes I remind her of some of the stuff she said to me, and she can't even believe she said it. But, she was instinctive enough to know that it would work.
Sure, of course.
So I remember saying to her one time, she said, "Oh, I just got off the phone with your mom and dad. I invited them to the family program." And I said, "I don't know if I want them to come to the family program." And she said, "Well, nobody gives a shit what you think. You're not that important."
Yeah. Sometimes that is a much needed statement though, Tom.
I know it is. I know it is. But, and you know what else about that? I trusted her already. So she could talk to me like that.
Yes.
She told me she loved me before she ever said anything like that.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the addiction cycle is a very narcissistic, self-driven cycle.
Mm-hmm.
So it's very appropriate to remind. I say that to my clients here all the time. Well, I don't want to involve my wife. Well, it's not about you.
Right.
It's about your wife.
Right.
Or it's not about you. It's about your kids, and they're going to want to be involved.
Right.
Or let's at least find out if they want to be involved.
Well, and this is an important aspect of all of it. How critical it is to involve the family in the healing process, right?
It is everything.
Say more about that.
So my whole, before the Manor existed, I spent a lot of time referring clients to other programs out of state. And the one thing that I found was they all had a very basic family program policy. And basically it was a family weekend where the family would come in and you would sit together, usually in a conference room or a big group room, and the family members would get educated, and then they would move really quickly into family therapy. And it was usually very traumatizing for the clients and the family.
Mm-hmm.
And so most of the time they were not effective. And so when I came here and I pretty much kind of started to create the family programming here, I really thought about what readiness and safety looks like.
Mm.
And to bring 10 family members here at once and to educate them on the same thing is the exact opposite of what we say we do here, which is individualized care.
Mm.
So on the front end, even sometimes before the client comes in here, we start talking with the family members. We start assessing what they need, what supports, where they're at, what supports do they need, what is their readiness to be involved. And we can assess that in the beginning so we already know what's going to happen. And on the other hand, as soon as a client comes in here, we start talking with them about what reparation looks like. Because the whole point of family work, when somebody's coming in here, starts with crisis management and then it comes to repair.
Mm-hmm.
There's no deep marital or family therapy that happens here because we only have 28 days. But most people are in crisis and most family members are in crisis. So we're assessing what does the outside family member need in crisis? Do they need a therapist? Do they need a sober coach? Do the kids need therapists? And we're already aligning with those needs. And back to your original question, clients that have children that are unwilling to involve their children in reparation will most likely relapse.
Mm.
So if we're, especially a parent, if we are not exposing the client to what they've done to their children early on in treatment, they will stay they're usually in some delusional cycle when they refuse to have their children involved, that either A, I haven't affected my children and they're fine, or B, their shame is so great that they can't tolerate feeling and hearing what their kids are going to say.
Mm.
And I can say that especially for mothers, fathers too, but I can say that especially for mothers, because when you have a child in utero, your number one job is to protect that child.
Mm-hmm.
And as a mom, if you're an active addict and you've hurt your children, you've actually crossed the line from what your job is and should be.
Mm.
And it doesn't even matter how old your kids. That is your number one job, no matter what. And so when mothers are unwilling or undermine the effect on their kids or unwilling to work with them, it's usually a pretty scary place for us.
When you say it's a pretty scary place for us, do you mean the clients? You mean the clients?
For us, for the clinicians working with the clients, knowing that we're already getting a barricade around doing this work, and then absolutely scary for the clients. Like, we already know that the relapse potential is really high if they're not allowing us to work with their children. Now, mind you, this is age appropriate, right? It's not like we bring it, but if it's anywhere teenage on up, we want to get the kids involved as soon as possible. So
I started my career at a Hazelden facility and actually got sober there first a couple years before. And the way they did the way they do family is when my parents came, they didn't go through the same program that I did. They went through with some of my peers. So it's really disarming because you're not emotionally invested in the other people in there. So it really is effective both with the clients and with the family members. And by the time they get around to doing the family sessions on Sunday or Monday, it's just completely different than it would have gone on Thursday or Friday.
I did experience one thing, though, that kind of reinforced what I've developed or what we've developed here. I had a 75-year-old woman who, for the first time, was getting sober. It was so amazing. And she said, I want to do this for my grandkids. And we brought her, this was pre-COVID, so we brought her son, who was in his 50s, in to come in for family work. And I had already prepped him and talked with him. And we went into the conference room and she sat across from him and she started talking. And he started weeping. And he started crying so hard that he couldn't speak. He was so moved by what's happening with his mother, but also so upset at the same time that he couldn't be part of the session. We had to end it because I'm like, oh boy, you're not ready for this at all. You're not ready for this. And I just remember thinking, I just can't even imagine if this would be, a room with other family members or other people in it.
One thing about this kind of work is that it's sacred.
It is sacred.
And I've always felt like it's really an honor to be able to be with someone at that place in their lives, whether it's the person with the addiction or a family member.
I loved, Tom, that used the word sacred. I don't think there's any other word that fits better than that.
No, I think about it a lot. I do. It's funny. Before my son was born, I had this guy, like a peer in business who I was talking to constantly, several times a day. And he was a dad. I had kids who were already in their late teens. And he said to me, just enjoy it. Just enjoy every moment of it that you possibly can. And so it gave me the presence of mind to just really be intentional about how much I love my son, just to be in the moment and just look upon him, understanding what a beautiful soul he is, and to just feel the gratitude of being able to be his dad. And it's kind of the same thing with this work. When I'm at a place where I can really, the expression hold space is kind of overused these days, but that's the best one I know. When I can really hold space with someone while they're going through that pain that they have to go through and sit with them within it and kind of just, hold their hand through it. Man.
Well, isn't it a gift that they're giving you? We are being handed the most precious gift, which is the gift of truth. And even this, if the space that I'm holding is that somebody's angry with me for doing something wrong, it's still a gift that they trust me enough to come to me and want to share what they're needing or what they're feeling. I think that that's what sets good therapists apart from others, right? Is the ability to stay attuned to wherever your client is at and hold the space, even if it could feel really uncomfortable for us.
To me, what has made me better is continuing to work on myself and to deal with my own wounds.
Absolutely.
Because then what could happen is it's like we need to be able to access our wounds to really have the appropriate level of compassion with people that comes through in a loving sort of way that you just can't do if you haven't done your own work enough, right? It just doesn't work.
No, and we talk a lot here with our clients about transference and countertransference, and it's essentially our own wounds getting kicked up by the other person. And to me, it's a beautiful concept to grow through when it's being brought up and discussed. And if you aren't doing your own work and those wounds are infected and they're out there and they can be, kicked up at any moment, you're at risk for your clients because you will not be able to use the countertransference effectively in the session. And you will most likely not be reacting out of attunement. You'll be reacting out of your own trigger, which as an early therapist, I knew that. I learned that very early on when I was younger. Like there were certain clients that I had a really hard time treating because they were kicking up all of my own trauma memories or my own trauma issues or attachment issues.
I had a client a few years ago who he was about the age I was when I stopped drinking. I was working with him the way I do with the clients that we collaborate with and just kind of getting to know him for the first time, asking about how he grew up and all that stuff. And he started talking to me about his older brother, who was another version of my older brother. And I could say to him, so you really, really looked up to him, right? Yeah. And you really, really hated him too, didn't you? Yeah. That's it. And I could tell him, you know what? That's normal to feel that way under the circumstances. There's nothing wrong with you. It's okay. It's confusing to have somebody who is supposed to be someone who loves you more than anyone else to betray you in that way.
Wow. Absolutely.
To me, it was a total God thing. And it gave me the ability to connect with him very quickly in a way that, aside from it just being gratifying for me, it was what he needed. That connection. It's what he needed.
100%.
And, I was saying to a guy the other day who we talked about me coaching him and how, he's having problems in relationships like all of them. He's not showing up in ways that he really can feel proud of himself about, not with the kind of strength that he could have. And he said, well, I don't really know how you can help me, but I guess we could give it a try. And I said, well, we'll start with my relationship with you. Like, we'll do it. Why don't we do it and then see where it goes? And that can be the template for all the rest.
But isn't that a beautiful concept? Like you're talking about you being in a relationship with your client.
Yeah.
And it's a we. That is so true. We are in a relationship with these guys.
Yeah. And and it's easy to be unsettled about that if you aren't secure in your work,
If we're not secure and if we're not doing our own work, the boundaries can get blurred really, really quickly, and that becomes dangerous to, of course, the clients. But there is a level of emotional intimacy that occurs in this. We only have 11 beds here, so there's 11 people where we're seeing and talking to every single day. And we're talking about very intimate information. And we try to show up safe and attuned in a way that we can create trust very early on. And once you do that, you are in a therapeutic relationship with your clients.
It's fun talking about this stuff. It is.
It's so fun, yeah. I know.
One of the things I was thinking about earlier today is, I've just learned to build people up. And just that goes so far. It really does. And part of the reason I learned it is because I recognized that people were doing it with me. But also, I was talking to you about this job I had years ago where I collaborated with your friend Tara. So she worked out of the practice of this guy, John Jameson, who's a brilliant therapist, And I knew of him, but I hadn't really met him before. And he sent us a client. It was the first client we worked with together. And I was kind of in a position to observe his behavior and then, report back to John. And we would check in regularly. And I was supporting him, And I would say, well, he didn't make his bed. And he'd say, oh, yeah, but, he's really great at this. It was always something he did wrong that I went to John with, and he would always come back with a strength that the client possessed. And it clicked to me, you're better at seeing what's wrong with someone than you are at seeing what's right with them. And I don't want to be that guy. And I called John and I had that conversation with him and said, listen, I see this about myself and I admire that you can do this and I want to be able to do it too. And, it's not like he coached me on it or anything like that, but it's, he was one of the early allies who I could talk to about, because, this stuff, it's not like we just do it alone, right? Yeah. So, but that was such a gift. And that is such a lesson for life too. Just to be able to see the good.
Especially during really trying times when everything in the news, there's nothing good. To try to persevere through this and then help clients in their battle for their life and persevere through that. And it's very easy to get frustrated. It's, we go into this profession to help and we want positive results.
Mm-hmm.
I at least speak for myself as a therapist, I feel really good when my clients are doing really good and they're making progress. And so when you're talking about addiction, which is a disease that never leaves the person, you have to accept that there's going to be relapses. There's going to be resistance. There's going to be slips. There's going to be blocks, which for a therapist, I just want sunshines and rainbows and everybody to be happy and them to stay sober can be really frustrating. And there are times that I have to remind myself, like, what are you frustrated at? Because this is all of the process. This is all what's supposed to be, but it's super hard not to get into a frustrated place where you have expectations for people to do it the right way or your way, which isn't always the right way.
It's not always what's best for them. The right way is the way that works for them, right? I mean, that's just...
Yes, right.
It reminds me, the first job I had doing this kind of work was as a resident manager at the halfway house I went to. And there was a therapist who did the groups there who had worked with me, and I would talk to her, and one of the guys relapsed, and I remember going to her and I was upset, and she said, we just do what we do. And we leave the results to God, and we can't get caught up in we cross paths with them, but we don't know if it's the part of the story where they actually get better. But hopefully we've said some things that will stick with them if they end up getting better down the road a little ways. And so we just do what we do. And it was good because it was a message that I got to let go of expectations of whether people get better or not. And really the only time for me that, not that it's not upsetting, but the only time it shakes me is either when it gets really ugly or there's someone who I've seen rise and rise and rise and they crash hard.
Absolutely.
That's hard to see.
It's very hard.
And it's one of those things that I remember doing this in front of a guy who worked for me one time. We had a client who was an alum of this program, and he came back and we were supporting him sort of on an outpatient basis, medication management and stuff. And he had a psychotic break, and we somehow got him in the office. And I sat with him until we could get somebody to take him to a psychiatric hospital. And he was dissociating in front of me. You know, I mean, I was watching him go in and out of a different person, you know, I mean, back and forth. And I'd been working with this kid for a year. And he had been doing great. And, you know, he left and he got off his medication. He stopped taking them. And man, he walked out of there and I just broke down in tears. It's just sometimes we do this stuff and most of the time we just do what we do. But sometimes we got to just recognize that this hurts. Like, we got to let the tears out, and it's so tragic. It is all so tragic, really. It is.
Well, because you actually deeply care most of the time for your clients.
Yeah, like, theoretically, right?
I had a client that in my private practice that killed themselves. So I've never had that before. And I'm going to knock on wood, a very long time. And I remember once saying to my husband, if that ever happened to me, I'm going to quit. Because I didn't think that I could be able to work through that in my head. And it basically was a case where I did everything right. And the family refused to take the client to the hospital and let her go home, even though she had an active suicide plan, and she killed herself. But anyways, somebody said to me, I think it was Dr. Thomas here who said to me, like, it is our job not to keep people alive, but to give them the choices and the opportunity and options to want to stay alive,
right,
or to use to stay alive. And I just remember hearing that. And I felt such a great relief, because I think when I made that comment of I'm going to quit, I remember that was being based on, I have the obligation to keep people alive. That's a huge obligation that, you know, no human being really can hold. And why would you want to? But so absolutely, when the people you care about, and especially with alcohol and drug, I mean, this is life or death. And they leave, and they either right away or long term, they relapse, and they have really scary relapses. There's no way I don't feel a lot.
Yeah.
There's no way.
You know, one thing that gets to me in this kind of work, and you know, early on it didn't, because I looked at things this way, but I really feel like if you do this kind of work and, you know, working with people in addiction treatment, he or she didn't want it bad enough is never an acceptable excuse.
Never.
And, you know, I'll tell families sometimes, you know, if you hear that, they're not doing their job.
Absolutely.
That's not good enough. Our job is to help them understand why they should want this.
Correct.
But, you know, all of us in different ways at times want to feel justified for giving up.
Yep.
And that's what that is.
It's 100% an excuse.
And the other part of that is, and it's been, we've heard this in popular culture so much now that people who don't know anything about addiction repeat this. And I hear it, especially on the front end of people trying to get care for their family members. Well, I know he really has to want it.
Yes, I'm not going to push him to do it.
Yeah, because I can tell he really doesn't want it.
I'm not going to push him to do it because he has to want it bad enough.
Yeah, and my response is, nobody ever wants it. Like, nobody ever wants to do this. Nobody ever wants to do this.
I always say that. I always then come back and be like, look, man, if your husband is refusing chemotherapy, would you not push him to do that?
Mm-hmm.
Like, why would that be acceptable to push when it comes to saving his life, but you're not going to push him into getting treatment or getting help? There is such a different stigma around mental health and around addiction than there is around medical issues or other diseases.
Well, and I think it's just a function of people just not understanding.
Yes, it is.
For me,
and I can go into that I could talk about that for another hour.
Yeah. Well, I mean, for me, the way I explain it to families is absolutely at some point they have to be internally motivated. But there's no question. It's unrealistic to think it's always going to happen on the front end. And what you're paying for is for somebody to help them understand why they should want to get better.
Correct. And if their internal motivation is to make you happy in the beginning, that's enough.
Yeah. Or I have kids or whatever it is.
That's enough.
It doesn't matter why. You know, one thing I heard from an old timer used to say, you know, there's never a wrong reason to do the right thing.
Exactly.
And it's true.
Exactly.
So what's on the horizon for you, Pam? You got anything big? You writing books or anything like that?
No, I don't have time.
Too busy working?
I do not have time. I'm too busy doing what I'm doing. You know, I just, I think as far as a couple of months from now, but I don't think that far ahead.
Yeah.
Because to be quite honest, I'm really satisfied and very happy with what I'm doing here every single day. I feel like I have the best job in the entire planet, and I feel very, very satisfied and happy in what I'm doing. And I don't have to really think about what's on the horizon other than obviously continuing my trainings and educations and things like that, because I'm always going to be a student. Mm-hmm. That's for sure. But for right now, it's just keep showing up the best that I possibly can.
Mm. Well, you know, one of the real pleasures of doing this kind of work is when you're able to connect with people at a facility and you're aligned philosophically and, you know, we get to work together.
Isn't that great?
It is. And it's just been such a pleasure to work with you guys. And
oh, you too.
Oh my God. And I just love Dr. Thomas, and she's so funny. But you know what? I mean, she is, and you are cut from the cloth that I came from in this industry. And I've been thinking about it a lot lately because I told you my anniversary was this week.
Yeah, it's incredible.
So I had a sister who got sober a year before I did, and she went through the same facility I did and where I ended up working later. And, you know, my sister was a pain in the ass. I mean, you know, she's that client who's the AMA risk like almost the entire time. And she was really, really sick. She had esophageal varices. She needed a liver transplant.
That's the scariest.
I mean, and while she was in treatment, they had to send her out to have a shunt put in her throat to protect her. I mean, she was that bad, you know, but nonetheless, I mean, her liver doctor sent her to treatment. I mean, the whole time she's stomping her feet, and she was very spirited and a lot of fun too, but you know, I mean, a force to be reckoned with, like all my sisters are in one way or another. But you know how it works when you're trying to prevent someone from leaving treatment, where it kind of starts with the techs, the lower level staff, and then it kind of moves up the chain. And if at the place they care enough, then the people, the upper level people, Dr. Thomases of the world will get involved.
Exactly.
Right. And my sister, you know, it started going up the chain, and this woman, Mary Stark, who was the director of residential services at this program, went in her bedroom and she sat my sister down on the bed and she got in her face and she said, "You are not leaving."
Wow.
And she stayed. And then, you know, a year later, she helped me. Wow. And then I've been able to help other family members and do this kind of work and help other people. And it's because that lady cared enough about her job and about people to fight.
It's amazing.
It is. And just my family, it has affected 4 generations of my family, between family programming and addiction treatment. I mean, you know, it just, the effect that we can have on people just by showing them love or going to bat for them in one way or another. The ripple effects can be astounding.
You're talking about thousands and thousands, right? Generations of generations.
Yeah. It's remarkable.
That's so overwhelming to think about.
It is. But you know, this time of year, man, I get flooded with emotion about all this stuff. And
you should. What a gift that you're giving back and changing.
Yeah. And well, you know, I mean, a lot of times when people say stuff like that, like, "Oh, you know, I'm so thank you for doing," and I'm just, this is what we do, you know.
Correct.
This is just, I'm not doing anything but just doing what we do.
Correct.
But it really is a gift to be able to do it.
It blows me away every day.
Well, okay, Pam. So if you were to look back on your life, when was a time when the younger Pam needed some encouragement or advice? What was going on? And what would you go back and say to her?
I mean, there's so many, because I feel like my younger Pam needs a lot. But there was one time, that one really particular time when I was young, and I was definitely suffering from probably some PTSD and anxiety, and I was diagnosed with a learning disorder. And I didn't have a learning disorder. But I remember being told somewhere along the lines that I really needed to prepare for my life as a learning disabled person, and that I would not be able to, you know, get into college. I wouldn't be able to do anything like that. And I would go back to that girl and I would say that basically tell her that you can do whatever you want to do. Mm-hmm. And whatever that person just told you is absolutely not true, because you should not be told the limitations at this age. Mm-hmm. So that would be it.
Yeah, I had an experience with that too, where that's part of why I do what I do and say the things I say to people, because who am I to say, right?
Exactly.
What do I know?
Right. So that's what I would do. And then I would say, guess what? It didn't work because I went in the opposite direction.
Right. Well, it reminds me, going back to treatment and working with clients. I mean, I'll never forget having this client who, I mean, she was really sick in a lot of ways. She had a lot of stuff going on, but nobody, you know, expected her to leave and go stay sober. And she came back a year later on anniversary night, and she walked around that unit and said, "You didn't think I could do it, did you?"
Wow.
So, you know what? If they stay sober out of spite, fine. Whatever.
I don't care.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Whatever.
It works.
Yeah.
Prove me wrong. Right?
Yeah. Well, this has been fantastic, Pam. Thank you for the time, and
thank
this
you,
has been
Tom.
fun.
Thank you so much, and God bless all you are doing.
Yeah, well, likewise.
It's great stuff. It's great stuff.
You know, it's been so much fun being able to work with some of the same clients and
yes,
and just connect.
It's been a gift. It takes a village.
It does. All right. Well, thank you, Pam.
Thank you.
All right, there you go, Pam Peckham. If you enjoyed listening to the show, please take the time to leave a rating or a review at Apple Podcasts, Podchaser, wherever you listen. If you know someone who would enjoy this or another episode, please forward it to them. If you have questions or comments, you can call 561-247-4757. Leave a message. I'd love to hear from you. Value any feedback you have to offer. And you never know, I might play it on an episode. So for early access to this episode, to all the 20 questions shows from Clubhouse, to a short little episode just for patrons every Saturday, all sorts of unedited interviews and supplemental content, you can support the show on Patreon, patreon.com/thepath-to-authenticity. Every little bit of support helps. It helps me keep doing this, doing more of this. Got some cool stuff in store for you guys. New podcast idea that came up this week that's definitely going to be a go, and I think it's going to be a January 1 kind of thing, a goal to have season 1 of a brand spanking new podcast, different kind of podcast by the first of the year. I want to thank the show's sponsors, the Manor and Windrose Recovery. Thank the band Punk Rock Opera, whose music you hear throughout the show. Their songs are used with permission from the artist and under a Creative Commons license. As always, the Path to Authenticity is proud to support the I Speak Media Foundation, media literacy. Visit thepath-to-authenticity.com. Check us out on Clubhouse, Facebook, Instagram, both at The Path to Authenticity. Anyway, I appreciate you guys. Thank you for listening. Thank you for coming back. Please keep doing it. Have a great week. Be nice.
Crawled through the desert for days and days. record turned over, started new again. I'll play for you and maybe you'll see why my dad always said I was like a I died on that street. I died on that road. I died in that fire. All those years ago.
Hey, we need a guitar player.
The Path to Authenticity is powered by Equivox. For digital marketing and web design services, visit equivox.com.